Exercise 1, Creo Parametric 5.0. In this exercise, we're going to go ahead and take a look at making a very simple part, as well as we'll take a look at some of the interface and options that you would typically need to know to get started. So let's begin. Go up to the top, go to New, select Part, and we're going to go ahead and name this capital E1, and hit OK. All right, some of the settings that I have set up on mine, I want to go over. At any time, you could go to the File tab up at the top left, go to Options, and in here you'll see that there's several different options to choose from. What we're going to go to first is Model Display, and the default model orientation I usually pick is isometric. And then the shade quality, depending upon your graphics card. If you're working off of a tablet which doesn't have a lot of horsepower, you might want to set it lower. For a very high level graphics card, you could set it a bit higher, but just be careful. I've seen instances where someone doesn't have a decent graphics card, or they don't have a professional graphics card, and they set it up very high, and it might cause some issues, especially performance issues and such. All right, I'm also going to go to the System Appearance area, and here you'll see there's a number of interfaces. You could set the interface to default, light, or dark. You could set the system colors to black and white, white on black, dark, light, or default. I'm going to stick with light, previous Creo default. And then you can actually also import, if you have a configuration set in advance, you could import that and use that. There's a number of other options in here as well. Another good one that we have is the Sketcher tab, and actually I would highly recommend this one. And down below here, you're going to find Sketcher Startup. Make the sketching plane parallel to the screen is very nice to have on, so I would absolutely recommend that, especially for my students. Another area up here, we have accuracy and sensitivity. Go ahead and set it to 3 decimal places. And now you could go ahead and hit OK. Now, by the way, at any point you could hit Restore Defaults if you don't like any of these settings, and it will save that. Go ahead and hit OK. Now, if it prompts you to save a configuration file, then go ahead and hit OK. On mine, I already had it set up. There were no changes really made to it, so that's why it didn't prompt me for that. So you could just go ahead and hit OK. You could keep the name as the default, whatever it is. I think it's just config dot something. So anyhow, moving along. So we can see we have our part file here up on the screen. Another area where you could go, if you go to the Prepare and Model Properties, here you could change some additional accuracy, that's precision for the actual model, the mass properties, the units. So here we could see it's set to inch, pound, second. So if you went to change, we could change it to millimeters, and so on and so forth. And I'm just going to hit close. I don't want any changes there. Okay, so now we're going to go ahead and build a rectangle. And inside Creo, on the left here, is your model tree, and you have your front, top, and right planes. And you can see those on the view screen right here. These are the planes. And those are your paper that you sketch on. In the center, that's your origin, or your CSYS, coordinate system. And you'll see that you can select anything from the model tree that's actually in the view screen as well. What we're going to do is we're going to start our sketch on the front plane. So if you click on the front plane, there's a couple ways you could do this. You can do it by starting a sketch immediately, or if you know what feature you want, you could go ahead and select the feature, like Extrude or Revolve. In this case, we're going to start off showing you just this method, the Sketch option. Now, once you have this here, we're going to go to the Rectangle tool. We're on the Sketch tab here. If you hit the arrow to the right of the Rectangle tool, you'll see there's parallelogram, center rectangle, slanted, corner. We want corner rectangle. Move your pointer to the center of the screen, and when you get this little dot that appears at the crosshairs, that means you're snapped in on it, and to the right there's a couple little boxes that appear. Those are adding automatic relationships. There's 2 types of entities that you could add in this parametric modeler. And basically one of them is dimensions, so for lines, circles, and arcs you could dimension them. But you could also add an additional layer essentially of constraints. And constraints are listed up the top there where you see constraints. There's vertical, horizontal, perpendicular, coincident, right up here where I'm looking. And so many of them are automatic as you snap, but some of them you could add in later on. So those are the two types of, there's constraints and dimensions. Click here, and then when I say click, you're clicking with your left mouse button. Typically, in this series of lessons, you will always hear me say, I'll just say click, and I'm always referring to the left. If I'm going to ask you to right mouse button click, which we do sometimes, I will be sure to mention it twice. And sometimes we will use the wheel, which I don't want you to use just yet. The wheel on your mouse, or a 3-button mouse, you can push it down. But don't use that just yet, because that will do some things that I don't want to have you run into just yet. Okay, so we drag this up. You'll see the rectangle. Just get it out here somewhere. And one thing to stay away from is this little equal symbol. When you get the equal symbol to the right of your pointer, it's very nice, actually, in certain cases when you're trying to make circles that are all the same diameter. In this case, it's going to make both the vertical and horizontal lines square. So we don't want that. So make sure you don't get that little auto relationship there, and click. Now, you could go to dimension to add the dimensions, but what's really neat about Creo is if you, this time you have the wheel on your mouse, I want you to push it down like a button. Don't actually scroll it, just push it down for 1 second and release it, and then you should see the dimensions appear. Now you could go ahead and grab those dimensions with your mouse button and drag them wherever you'd like. I like to suggest just keep them between the what I call the goalposts, or the extension lines that you see there. Okay, always line them up. All right, now we're going to go ahead and change these. You just simply double click, and you could go ahead and type in this case it's going to be 3 inches wide. So if you want to use your keypad, make sure number lock is on, and just hit 3. You don't have to type 3.000 or anything like that, unless it's defined as like 3.125 or something. But go ahead and hit enter on your keyboard, and you will see it will squeeze it down. And what happens is that it transforms that to what's called a strong dimension. As you hover over it, you'll see in parentheses it says it's strong. Now take a look over here. If we go over here to this one is still weak, and there's a variation in color between the two. Let's go ahead and double click on the weak dimension, and it's usually a lighter blue. It depends on your screen colors that you chose initially, but this one's going to be 5 inches, so just type in 5 and hit enter. Okay, and now you could go ahead and click. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to use my wheel, or you could go right here to refit. Go ahead and click on refit. Your wheel will zoom in and out, by the way, and depending upon where you are with your pointer, like if I wanted to zoom in and out of this corner, hover over that corner and scroll towards yourself, and it will zoom to that corner, and then zoom out again, or just hit the refit up there. All right, the next thing we're going to do, we're going to go ahead and hit OK. Whenever you finish a sketch, just go ahead and hit OK. Some systems enable you to go ahead and click on model right away. Just be aware this one you first have to hit OK, and now you could go to the feature, the model tab, and there's extrude. Click on extrude. Now if you rotate this with your middle mouse button, you can rotate actually. If you, or I should say your wheel, if you hold it down like it's a button and move your mouse left and right, up and down, it will rotate. So that's how you dynamically rotate in Creo. Again, try your scroll forward and backwards, and focus on certain points, or focus in the center of the model to center it. And then remember, there's also refit. Here we have the ability to zoom in and out, so you could click and drag a fence to surround a specific area. You have to click twice for that one. And then there's a refresh, there's a zoom out. Okay, so, and also we have display style. We could go to wireframe, shading. My favorite, shading with edges, or shading with reflections is really nice too. And you get this appearance below, it gives it more of a realistic appearance. And that depends on you, whatever your preference is. The shading with edges is very nice for learning because you could actually see the edges better, and they're in black here. Okay, there's also rendering options. You could set a scene background and such. We don't need that. And then over here we have saved orientations. You have front, top, right. And so if you wanted to go to the front, you just click on it, and it will reorient you to the front. But let's go and click on it and go to standard orientation. And our standard orientation was set when we were in the options, the file options menu, and we set it to isometric. All right, you also have perspective, which some people like to work in perspective. I think it skews the dimensions a little bit, makes it a little more challenging for new users, so be careful of that one. And then there's a view manager we're not going to cover. Also, these planes that you see here, you could turn those on or off. Right here is the datum display filters. You'll see that there's axes, the coordinate system, points. If you select off or select all off, you'll see those will all disappear. And it's, again, a preference if you like to have them on or off. Note that we'll probably have to toggle them back on later, but you could keep them off. And also there's spin center. Now spin center, when you use your rotate, if you get to a corner, you could rotate around that corner or here, but when you go to spin center, it finds the centroid of the model and rotates about that by the default. So you could turn that on or off, whichever preference you have. And then this is just for annotations display. We don't need that just yet if we wanted to see the annotations on the model. Okay, over here on the left, you can see now we're in the extrude options, and we can make it a solid or a surface. We don't want a surface, otherwise it's going to be hollow. We want a solid, and that's the default typically. We could also set the depth. So you could set it here by typing in 0.5 over that. Or you could actually go over here and double click on that dimension, type in 5. Or you could grab the handle, the drag handle, drag it in or out. And you get that little slide rule there. Okay, and I'm going to make sure it's set to 0.5. This little pink arrow will flip it backwards or forwards. Okay, and this button does the same thing up here. It flips it. But I'm going to set it to 0.5, hit enter, and hit the green check mark to apply. Or middle mouse button will actually apply it as well. Middle mouse button, or the wheel, if you push it down like it's a button, it does a lot of different things, as you're going to find out. So we could use it to rotate, you could use it to add dimensions, you could use it to exit out of whatever you're working on. So it's a very versatile button. Okay, now we're going to go ahead and click on this surface here. Rather than select a plane, you could actually select any planar / flat surface. So that being said, when you click on this, you get a number of options. You could edit the dimensions that were in the original model. You could edit the definition, that's the extrusion depth that we selected, or direction. There's also some other things I'm not going to get into just yet. There's some quick launch tools here, like if you want to extrude, if you want to make a plane, and things like that. But what we're going to do here, instead of starting a sketch, I'm going to show you another method which actually just goes directly to extrude. And if you know what you're going to do in advance, select it, like the feature. Like if you know you're going to extrude something, go ahead and select it. And I'm going to show you in a second why that there's an advantage to pre-selecting the feature before the sketch. Let's go to rectangle again. Notice there's the line tool. We'll use that in the lab later on, but the line tool is very easy to use. You can click and you can make a rectangle with lines. But I'm going to use the rectangle tool, which is pretty efficient. I'm going to go to the lower left corner and snap, and I get that little square that appears. I know I'm locked in. I'm going to click and drag it across here to the right. Notice there is a midpoint and 2 endpoints. We don't want to snap to either one of those. We just want to snap to the edge. So go ahead and click on that edge, and I'll middle click, and it brings the dimensions up. Now, you might ask, like, that there was that weak dimension. Like right now, if we hover over this, it will say that it's a weak dimension. If we double click on it, make a change to it, it'll make it into a strong dimension. You also have the ability to click on it and lock it. So locking it will prevent anyone from grabbing a corner of the geometry and stretching it. Because right now, at any time, you could click and drag this. Even if you make it into a strong dimension, you still have the ability to drag and adjust it. But when you lock it, it locks it down, so no one could do that. So I typically don't practice using the lock too often, but there are times when it's come in handy. Typically strong is good enough. Just remember, before you go and take a part out into production, everything should be, I would recommend make them all strong dimensions, because that shows that you've basically addressed every single dimension. There's nothing there that's just floating at some arbitrary number, and that's just a good thing, a good practice. All right, now here's why they call them weak and strong dimensions. Because if you go to the dimension tool, let's say we wanted to override that dimension with selecting something else. You can do that. Like, let's say I wanted to dimension to this side instead. I could click. Now here's the trick with bringing up a dimension for something. You just middle click. So on the wheel, you're going to click one time and it will drop the dimension. And notice the one on the far right disappeared because it was a weak dimension. And so a new dimension that's added overrides weak dimension. So let's go ahead and type in 1.5 for that and hit enter. And in this case, it really doesn't matter which side we dimension here, because these little green boxes are the constraints, like what we see up here. You'll see there's these constraints. And those constraints lock down the geometry in certain conditions. So this is coincident to that point. This line is always going to stay vertical. This line is going to stay horizontal, and so on and so forth. If you don't want those constraints, you could click on them and hit delete on your keyboard. And then like we would be able to have this line go out of sync from horizontal, and it could go at an angle. We could put a dimension then on the right side that would control the length, or we could put an angle dimension in, which we'll learn that in upcoming lessons. Anyhow, let's go ahead now. We're going to hit OK. And one reason we didn't need this one dimension from width, because it's tied in from this corner to this corner, and it has vertical relationships, so it can't move. It's actually tied to the 3-inch width of the block below it. Let's hit OK. And notice, because we went directly to extrude, it automatically extruded it as soon as we hit OK. Whereas before we had to click on the model tab, or actually the model tab came up and we just clicked on extrude from there. And so we're going to go ahead and put in a 0.5 depth for this. It's going to merge it with the part below it and hit the green check. All right. Now here is the reason why it's not a bad idea to select your features first. You don't have to. Creo doesn't make you. But the thing is, you'll notice with Extrude 1, we have Sketch 1, and then we have a Sketch 1 entity up above it. And that's what it does automatically. It's behind the scenes, or actually right in front of us there, when we pre-select Sketch, it leaves that little tracer behind. Whereas before, actually when we went directly to Extrude, there's not an extra little tracer on the feature tree. Now you might think, well, what's the big deal? Well, first of all, the feature tree is a little bit easier to read. Secondly, any little features that show on the feature tree do have a tendency to take up a small amount of system resources of your computer. Imagine you're working on something that has 1 million parts in it, millions of features. Multiply that little piece of, or that little system resource over time, and it will slow down your model. So for efficiency purposes, it's really a little bit better to go right to the feature like extrude or revolve, because it's tied. There's only one area where it's showing up. Okay, but that's just opinion there. You don't have to do that. Okay, so now what we're going to do is we're going to go to round here, and we're going to put in some additional features. Oh, before we go to round, actually, we want to put a hole in here. Now, Creo does have a very nice hole tool. We're going to learn about that later in exercise 4. But here we're going to go ahead and select this face. We want to put a hole in it. And we're going to use the extrude tool. Again, this is the very basic tutorial number 1, which shows you the basics to get you started. So I'm going to start the quick launch on there for extrude. And now I'm going to go to the circle tool. If you hit the little arrow to the right of circle, you'll see there's center and points, concentric, 3-point, and tangent. We're just going to use center and point. Now, locate your pointer in the upper left quadrant of this block here and drag out a small circle and click. And then remember to show the dimensions, click on the middle button, which is your wheel, one time. And then the dimensions will appear. So here we have a few dimensions that we could use. Oops, I didn't want to grab that, but let's drag this up here. And it's always good to lay these dimensions out. So first of all, this is going to be 0.75 for the diameter. I just double clicked on that. This dimension is going to be 1 inch, so it's going to be offset. So we locate where the hole is with that. Now vertically, you'll see we're at 3.99 or whatever. It depends on how close you were to the target here. It doesn't matter. If we were to double click on that, we could type in a value of 4 and make that a strong dimension. However, let's use our little trick with the dimension tool and override that. Because let's say we wanted to dimension it to the top edge instead of the bottom edge. So click here and click on the center point. Move your pointer over to the left where you would want to see the dimension. And now remember, this is where you drop the dimension, and to drop it is the middle button or your wheel. You push down on the wheel and the dimension will appear. Go ahead and type in 1 and hit enter. And now we have a strong dimension there and a strong dimension here. Again, I recommend middle click a couple times. That's the wheel. And then basically you'll be able to move some of these dimensions. What I recommend is laying your dimensions out as you would want to see them on a print or on your drawing that you're going to make. And sometimes you may not be making a drawing. You might go directly to model with this. But laying them out in this fashion, later on when you make the drawing, you could call up those dimensions automatically and they'll come up exactly how we left them. And so that's why it's a good practice. It saves you time later on down the road. Or if you have someone who just does detailing in your office, you're going to help them out. So it's just a good practice. It's housekeeping, you might say. And later on, we'll see that in exercise 6 when we look at drawings. Okay, now we're going to hit OK here. And initially, it's hard to see what's going on there, but rotate with your middle mouse button. Remember, you hold that down like it's a button, move your mouse left a little bit, and you can now see the extrusion. First of all, it's adding material. We don't want it to add material. We want to cut a hole. So flip this little arrow, and much of the time, if it detects a full volume behind it, the algorithm inside Creo, which is kind of like an AI, will automatically determine, in this case, which was the right selection, to cut it. And so that little message that popped up was just letting you know, hey, we're going to automatically cut it because it looks like that's what you want to do. So the Remove Material button was already selected for us. Be aware, sometimes that might not turn on depending upon how the algorithm detects what's behind it. So sometimes it might get a little confused and you might not see that, so you might have to click on the Remove Material button. But in this case, we didn't have to. All right, so now we see this little arrow up here. I want you to click on it. This is the end conditions of how you want the extrusion to take place. So right now we're kind of at a blind value. It's set to 1.47. There's mid-plane for symmetric parts. That's great. Extrude up to next. There's a bunch of them here. This is the extrude all, basically. Cut through everything. And you might ask, why do we need to use that? Because right now it appears that it's cutting through all. Just here's a little side note, something called design intent, and you'll hear it in some of my lectures. Design intent is your plan on how you want your model to react. And Creo, being one of the very first parametric modelers that was out there, dates back to the 80s actually, and it's been worked on ever since. Basically, the idea of parametric modeling is the ability to change things without having to completely remodel it. And change occurs in design all the time. So for example, this plate that we are making may grow in size one day. It might be determined that, hey, instead of a ½ inch, maybe we want to make it 1 inch thick. And so remember, design changes always come down. Well, if we would have left that at whatever distance it was set to, what if the plate gets thicker than that distance? All of a sudden, you no longer have a through hole. So you're doing a disservice to the person. It could be you or it could be another designer later on down the road that has to make a change to it, because now not only do they have to change the thickness, they have to change the depth of the cut of the hole. So design intent, that's just a very basic example of it. I'm going to talk about it as we go through. It is one of these things that you don't have to think of too much right now, but keep it in the back of your mind, and when you start working in industry, you'll see there's advantages to modeling that way because it helps with efficiency, and also the person who's going to work on it next time doesn't have to worry about it as what you modeled. Okay, so I set it to through all. I hit the green check mark. There we have it. Now we're going to dress this up a bit. And before I go and do that, notice if you actually click on the model or double click on it, you'll see the dimensions will appear. Like there's our 5 inch, there's 3 inch, there's the ½ inch right there. So let's say we want to change it. You could actually pull the, could double click on that and type in a new value. So let's say I wanted it to be 1 inch. I could type in 1 and hit enter, and it updates. That's the beauty of parametric modeling, the ability to change. And Creo is one of the granddaddies of that. They did an excellent job of creating that, and now most modelers follow through with that. Okay, so now let's go ahead and add some additional features. I'm going to go to the round tool here, And let's go ahead and just select the edge that you want. Imagine that you have a file in your hand and you have a block of metal, this part sitting in the other hand, and you wanted to round off these edges. You actually click on the edges that you would contact with the file. So this edge right here, and you'll see little grab handles. Grab that and you could drag it. This is for conceptualization, because quite often you're not quite sure how things are going to turn out, but they give you these little drag handle tools to make your life a little bit easier. Okay, and we see it's set to 1 inch. Sometimes you want to just verify, double click on it, type in the explicit value, but we're going to do that over here too. So select this edge, and there we have the 1 inch as well. Go ahead and hit the green check mark. Now the round tool, where we were just at, be aware the round tool actually, other systems, if you're familiar with them, might call it a fillet. Some systems call them blends. Some systems call them radiuses. So be aware there's a number of different names for this. Round is all that basically. Okay, now we're going to go to chamfer. Let's take a look at chamfer here. If you hit the little arrow to the right chamfer, you'll see there's a corner chamfer too, but we're just going with edge chamfer. Now we have the ability to have it calculated by distance to distance, angle to distance, or 45 degrees to distance, and there's a lot of neat options in here. Since we have a 90-degree break here between these faces, we could go distance to distance and it will automatically be 45 degrees if we make them equal. So let's go ahead and we'll just leave it distance to distance. But we could put 45 by a distance and it would be the same. But let's go ahead and type in over here. We want 0.125. And then let's go ahead and select this edge. And you'll see the preview. Notice it follows through. Let's go ahead and select this edge over here. And hit the green check mark when you're ready. All right, now let's rotate this around, and we want to change this. Let's say this is a thin-walled part. It's going to be a cover for something, and we want to shell it out. It's going to be plastic, actually. Let's go to shell here, and set the wall thickness 0.062. And what you do is you just select the faces that you don't want. So click on this surface here. You'll see the preview of the shell. We're not done yet. Try clicking on this surface. You'll see that it turns off one surface and substitutes the other. Now to get them all, just hold Control and select. Go ahead and hold Control and select this bottom surface as well. And that's all. You could go ahead and select this surface if you wanted, okay, but that's not what we want. So if you continue to hold Control and deselect the surface, it will return. Okay, hit the green check. And there we have our thin-walled part. Now let's take a look at applying some material changes or colors. Inside Creo here, first of all, you can set it to perspective view. And perspective gives it a vanishing point. It makes it look more realistic in appearance. Then we could go to view, and we have scenes. We could tinker with different scenes in here. I actually like the default scene I'm in right now, so I'm not going to change it, but feel free. And then go to appearances here, and you'll see that there's a library of different materials to choose from. And I'm going to go with the, let's go with a polished aluminum. Like here's a PTC standard aluminum polished. Okay. And now you could select entities, but I want to show you this filter here. Notice I have a paintbrush. Go to the filter in the lower right corner. This enables you to filter out certain things you might not want. Like I could select individual surfaces to add that color to, or I could go to all or part. Let's just go with part. Click anywhere on the part that turns green, and then to apply that change, you're going to click on the wheel, one middle click. Now it doesn't look all that much different, because actually the gray that I had set up was what it was initially. So let's see a different appearance on some other faces. So click on this, and I'm going to go with the, I'm going to go with standard copper polished. Click on that. Now instead of all, select surface. And here you could hold Control, and select these surfaces here of the chamfer. Let's say we want those to highlight and the whole. Release Control, and now middle click, and now you can actually see the color change. Feel free to choose any colors in there and tinker around with it. Now, to get it to look more realistic, we already have perspective turned on, but go to Applications and find Render Studio. When you click on Render Studio, here now it actually runs fabulous render in the background, and the longer you let it sit, the better it will actually, the crisper the image will appear. All right, and just remember to turn it off when you're done, because it still runs in the background and it takes up a tremendous amount of system resources, which is good. The more, actually it is multi-threaded, so just to show you this, if I do a Control-Alt-Delete and go to Task Manager, and if I go to Performance, we could actually see the CPU utilization is 100%. And this has 8 threads. It's a 4-core processor, and it's currently running this way. So we have that ability to actually run all the cores. Okay, and here you can actually see even the NVIDIA GPU is running below it. So it's pretty impressive what this does here. Let's move that over. There we can see. So it's actually utilizing the Quadro professional graphics card in my system as well. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and close that. And I'm going to disable it, turn off real-time rendering. You can actually hear the fan in my computer going crazy there for a while. But just remember, if you have those multi-threaded processors, that's going to take full advantage of it, and it's going to run much faster with the more cores you have. All right, now what I want to do there is I want to go ahead and go to the scenes, and let's see, I'm going to go to Edit Scene here. And this gives us more options. And first of all, also, so it's not taking up too many system resources, go over here to, let's see, oh, well, since we have this open, we can't adjust it just yet. But anyhow, we can see that there's different scenes to choose from. Again, I do like this scene that they have as a default, but you have the ability to change the environment. So you have the XZ plane as the floor plane, but let's say we want the XY. And now let's go to real-time render, and basically put the floor underneath here, which I like that a little bit better. Now you can hear my fans are roaring again, but that's just showing you the power of this rendering application. It makes these beautiful renderings. And you could adjust and rotate things. You could have put in additional lights. There you can see the light right there, and you have the ability to adjust it. Let's bring it over here. And you could add additional lights, spotlights, adjust its intensity and the softness of the shadows. And then the background, you can change the background. So there's a lot of wonderful tools in here for making professional renderings. Let's go ahead and turn it off again. And since I rotated it, let's see. There we go. Okay, I'm going to turn that off one more time. Since I adjusted that light source, you can see it's very bright. And what you could do is actually, if you get out of the rendering studio, now we could go over here and make some adjustments that might be a little bit, let's see, that's just too bright. If I want to adjust that, I'm going to have to go back to the studio. So let's go right back to rendering studio and go back to scene and just pick a different one. Like here, I'm going to go with that one. Just click on it. Oh, interesting. That actually has, we're now on a factory floor, or actually a kitchen floor, looks like. And I'm just going to hit close. All right, so that brought the colors back. I like it. And remember, you could always turn off perspective. Creo does a pretty darn good job of actually positioning the dimensions in perspective. I've seen in other systems that don't do it quite as well. So really working in perspective mode might be optimum, especially those who are very visual. All right, now we're going to go ahead and take a look at some of the other options here. So in the book, those of you who are following along in the training guide, if you go and go to the Vertanu 1, so you can type in vertanux1.com, hit enter, and that will bring you to the website. In here you'll find the instructional manuals. Right now I just have the Creo 4.0 Basics Training Guide. As you can see, I'm working on the 5.0 currently. Don't hold your breath. I'm not sure when that will ever get done as far as the 5.0, but there's also an advanced manual. When you click on this, you could actually see, here's the training guide. It's free, just don't print it out and try and sell it. It's meant to help people out there. So there's actually a syllabus in there and some additional information. Here's links to the old videos. Like I said, since this is the first in a series, I've just begun. This is the 4.0. And there's even a video on how to make a portfolio. Those of you looking to make a career out of this, definitely take a look at that video. It shows you how to use Microsoft Word. If you don't have Microsoft Word, there's the, like I have down here, you have the Open Office, LibreOffice. You could get that for free. I don't have a video on how that one works, but it's very similar. And then here's the points totals with the exercises being E1, 2, 3, and then the labs being the L's, and there's the point totals. There's also one quiz that we have coming up in a couple weeks, but they're all in here. There's no page numbers on it, but there's an introduction to the interface. And earlier when we looked at the options, it shows you some of those options and where to find those things. And as we get through this, this is the first lesson we just completed with step-by-step instructions. And finally, if you pass through there to page 24, you'll see Lab 1 or L1, and then page 25 is actually the quiz. Or, I'm sorry, that's Lab 1B, and then the quiz comes after Lab 2. But anyhow, these are the two models. You can watch the video and continue on to see how these are created. If you want to download this document, you just hit download. It's just on Google Docs. You could rotate it then. You could right-click and rotate and see this the proper way. But you can see in this case, it's just like an F that I'm going to put together really quick. 2.5, 1 inch there, 2.5 by 3.5, and it's a 1/2 inch thick. So let's build that in Creo. So I'm going to go to New, Part, and I'm going to name this capital L1 for Lab 1. Hit OK. And again, I recommend giving those a shot on your own. Don't watch the video. Like, pause here if you can. You're going to learn so much more than actually watching the video. Watch the video maybe afterwards and see what you see a different technique, but there's a dozen ways to model this part, and you might take one way, but if you watch the video afterwards, you'll say, oh, you know, that's a neat little idea there. I didn't think to do it. But if you watch the videos, you're going to spoon feed yourself, and spoon feeding really doesn't make the best for education. So anyhow, let's go ahead and select the front plane, go to Extrude, take the line tool, click at the origin, drag up a vertical line, and middle click 2 times. The reason I like to do this is because what it's going to do, it's going to set our scale, and so that part is 3 inches in height. And then we could actually hit right up here to the refit. And there actually is an option in the Tools Options, I believe, that will automatically fit it to the screen as you model it. I'm not going to go there right now, though. Go ahead and go to the line tool. If someone knows where it is, please share that on the links below, or the comments below. Okay, now I'm going to go ahead and click this and drag this out to the right. And then I'm going to drag this up a little bit here, go across here, go up, and I could infer to that line there. That's a little inference line, you see. Drag this one down. Be careful. Look at this. There's an equal symbol to the right of my pointer. Stay away from the equal symbols. There is a way to turn them off, actually, in the options. Again, if you watch the first minute of this E1 video or go back, you'll see you could search through there and find it. I'd like to have the equal sign, or the equal, I should say, automatic constraint of equal come up because it's very useful. But I don't want it here. So move it to where there's no equal symbol. Just the vertical line, click, drag this across, stay away from equal symbols, click, drag it up, and infer. Let's see, I suppose we could make this one equal because eventually it will be, but you know what? Yeah, let's go ahead and just do it and click here. Middle click to end the line chain. Now you'll see the dimensions. This is supposed to be 5 inches. And if I go back to the training guide, oh, I'm sorry, it's actually 2 by 3.5. That's good. You can see how this works then. 2 inches, and then this is 3.5. Now you'll see it will truncate. Could even, maybe even like intersect geometry by accident. Like sometimes you'll get something like that. And then the shading disappears. The shading is an indicator that it's ready to go because it's a water-type boundary condition. Once you get something like this and the shading disappears, you got to fix it. So just drag some of these points and get them to look similar to what you want. Look at that. You can grab the lines. I'm not in any tool. I'm just dragging them with my pointer and my mouse button pushed down. All right, let's add a few dimensions here, not the ones that they give me. So I'm going to click on this line here. Right above it, I'm going to middle click. And let's see, maybe that isn't a dimension I want. Oh, it is. That's supposed to be 1 inch. So type in 1. The next one is going to be 1.75. So from here to here, notice I'm clicking on the lines. You could click on the points, but there's an advantage to clicking on lines sometimes in that it will stay parallel versus sometimes if you click on points, it'll start to actually go at some bizarre angles. So right here, middle click, and it's 1.75. And then from here to here, click, and that one is going to be 2.5 inches. All right, now let's look at some of the depths there. Okay, we have 1 inch and then 0.85. So this from here to here, middle click is going to be 1 inch, and from here to here, 0.875. All right, we're fully constrained. We have it adjusted just like the print. We're ready to go. Hit OK. It goes directly to extrude, and the thickness was 1/2 inch. Hit the green check. And you're done. Now, here's the thing about saving. Now, there's a number of ways you could do this. You could set up where you want these files to automatically go. By default, there's actually a folder. I don't go into that because every company is a little bit different. I just let it go to the default place where it would save them. And actually it doesn't save them initially unless you save a backup. So I like to do this. I like my students to go to File, Save As, and then find Save a Backup. Now this way, it allows you to locate where you would like to put it, because right now it's just in my, actually I'm going to go ahead and put it on my desktop, and I'm going to go ahead and name it. You don't actually, in this case, when you're doing a backup, what I like about it is that you don't have to rename it. It automatically renames it for you. Don't put anything in the backup area. It's going to keep the name as L1 because that's what we entered in, and hit OK. Now there's a backup of that. If you were to do a save as and there's save a copy, this enables you to change the name. So you could relocate wherever you want to save that and use it. Okay, so there's a couple options there for saving. And again, I don't like to go too much into file management because everyone does it a little bit different. Some systems have PDM, product data management, or product lifecycle management software setup that kind of guides you through revision control and such. So I don't really talk too much about it. All right, so now we're going to go ahead to the next model. I'm going to go to New, Part, and this is going to be L1B. Hit OK. Now, as we look at the drawing for this one, it's 3 by 5, and then it has these little blocks and such and holes. So let's go on the front plane, go to extrude. Now, you might ask, like, what does it matter, front, top, or right? Well, if it can matter a little bit, but really, if you understand what you're looking at from a spatial perspective, it doesn't really always matter. But it's a good practice to try and think of it this way. Like if you had a stapler, and if you looked at the very front of a stapler, you would actually see there's not much to see on it. It actually is a couple of rectangles. But if you look at the right side of a stapler, you would see it's elongated, it has an opening, there's much more detail to it. So you might want to choose that right side and draw it as such, just like of the stapler. And actually that's what you would sketch on. You would select the right plane and sketch that right view. So again, it's really personal preference, and I'm going to just go ahead and, in this case, go to front, and I'm going to go to extrude because I know I'm going to extrude it. Now for the rectangle, I'm going to go with center rectangle. That's because this is a symmetric part. Whenever you have a symmetric part, locking everything to center really helps out. And the advantages are you don't have to always create additional planes. There's for mirroring, there's a lot of advantages. So in this one, I'm just going to click at the center and drag out my rectangle, middle click 2 times, and it's going to be 3 inches in height by 5 inches wide, and I'm going to hit fit. Remember to center these dimensions. You can just grab them and center them. It's just a good practice. Now I'm going to go ahead and draw the circle in. I'm going to go over here and draw this one circle in the upper left corner, middle click, and it's going to be a 1/2 inch in diameter, and it's going to be located 0.75 off both edges. And actually, let me verify that. I might be wrong on that. Let's go to the print. Nope, it is. All right. Now, you could go and add that on every corner, and it's great practice, but I'm going to show you a little trick here. We're going to move ahead. Exercise 2 shows you how to mirror. The whole exercise is devoted to revolves and mirroring entities. This is a perfect scenario where you could learn to mirror versus drawing them in individually, but do what you like. To mirror, you're going to need center lines. Click on the center line. Now, even though these look like center lines here and here, they're actually not. Those are where the planes, the right plane and the top plane intersect at the origin. So it's a crosshairs. So don't get that confused with center lines. You have to draw in center lines. So use the center line tool over here. Go to the origin, click and drag straight up and click. It will draw a center line. Now click on that center point again. Draw this line over here and click. And then middle click twice. The reason we need those center lines is to mirror. So now we could select what we want to mirror. You just click on this circle, go to mirror up here at the top, and select the center line you'd like to mirror across. You can only mirror across one center line at a time, so just click there. All right, now click somewhere on the white screen here to exit. Notice the mirror tool is not active. You have to pre-select your geometry. So you can hold Control and select both of these, or you could window like this. You could get away from any dimensions and such and click and drag a fence to surround both entities, and only the 2 entities you want to mirror are encapsulated. They're both selected now. And now the mirror tool becomes active. Click on it and select the horizontal center line, and it will mirror those over. Notice there's no dimensions tied to it. Don't worry, because look at that little equal symbol. And then these are symmetric constraints. So they're all tied together. So if I ever did change this, like to 1 inch, watch how they all update. So you don't have to add dimensions. So that saves time. Mirroring is a wonderful tool. Another mistake students make is they bite off more than Creo can chew. See this little cutout here? Don't put that in until after you model this part. So go to OK. And this is going to be 1.5 inches. We're going to go the full depth and hit the green check. Now click on this model, this face, go to Extrude, and once again select Center Rectangle, and right at the center. Notice this is why I suggested centering it using the Center Rectangle, a symmetric part. Now I could click here and easily draw on that centered rectangle here. Middle click, it's going to be 1.5 inches. Center the dimension just so it looks good. Hit OK, and it's going to extrude it, but let's flip that by hitting the arrow and then grab this little dot here and drag it down. It's actually only supposed to go 1 inch deep. So I got to 1 inch there, or you could, oops, it moved a little bit. I could double click right here, type in 1 and hit enter. So now we know it's 1. You could do it up here as well. All right, hit the green check. And that's it for that drawing. But what I recommend is dress these parts up, because you're trying to make as many parts as you can. Many of you who are looking to get a job doing this, looking to make, and even if you just want to tinker with it, it's a great idea to make a portfolio from this. Go to the rounds and have a little fun with this one. Even though this isn't in the print, just tinker around, like click on this edge and drag it out to somewhere where you like it, and then put matching ones in here and here. Okay, to select through that, we're going to rotate, click on that edge. You could also select this edge here, that one, and get this one here too. All right, hit apply. Now we could go to the chamfer tool. We'll keep it at the 0.125 distance to distance. Click here. You could even put chamfers for a countersink on the edges of the hole. Okay, if you select the face, just Control deselect it. and then select a different edge. I accidentally selected a face there, and the whole thing turned green. We didn't want that. All right, hit the green check. We could put in a round down below here and right here. The green check. All right, so we made a much more complex looking part. I mean, it's still pretty simple, but let's flip it around. Now it looks like some sort of plug. And now we could go to shell and set it to like 0.1 thick and click on this face and look at that. Now we've made, within a few, like less than a minute, we took a very simple part, made it look much more complex, and now you could, in theory, put this in a portfolio, and it looks like you've done some pretty neat stuff. So tinker around with those tools and have a little fun with it. It's a great product. All right, this concludes exercise 1.